Frank Donovan had never considered himself particularly attractive. At 58, he often looked in the mirror and saw what he thought was an average older guy with silvering hair, a few wrinkles around the eyes, and a little extra weight around the middle. His daily routine was quiet, predictable even. Mornings with coffee and the newspaper, afternoons walking his golden retriever, Max, and evenings with jazz records and an old recliner that had molded perfectly to his body over the years. He had accepted his life for what it was. Calm, solitary, and simple. But life had its own way of shaking things up when you least expected it. It all started when his longtime friend, Charlie, dragged him to a local community fundraiser at the town's recreation center. Frank had grumbled about it, reluctant to trade his quiet Saturday night for crowded rooms and forced small talk. Charlie, ever the persuasive one, insisted. "Come on, Frank," he said. "You need to get out more. You're not as invisible as you think." Frank wore a dark blazer over a blue button-down shirt, pressed slacks, and a pair of polished leather shoes that hadn't seen daylight in years. He felt out of place the second he walked into the center. Laughter bounced off the walls, a jazz trio played softly in the corner, and people, young and old, mingled with plates of appetizers and plastic wine cups in their hands. As he walked toward the refreshments table, a woman about 35 with dark curls and a striking emerald dress looked up from her drink and smiled. Frank smiled politely and looked away, assuming she was smiling at someone behind him. But then she stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Jessica," she said. "You're Frank, right? Charlie's friend." Caught slightly off guard, Frank nodded. "That's me." Jessica offered her hand, and Frank shook it. Her grip was confident. "Charlie told me you'd be here. Said you might need help finding the wine table." Frank chuckled. "I've been known to get lost in places like this." Jessica laughed and nudged him gently toward the bar setup. "Well then, let me be your tour guide for the evening." What followed was an evening of unexpected attention. Not just from Jessica, but from a handful of others, both men and women, who engaged him in conversations, complimented his voice, his laugh, even his choice of shoes. He'd always worn them because they were comfortable, not stylish. That night when Frank returned home, Max greeted him with a tail wag and an expectant yawn. As Frank sat on the couch, loosening his collar, he replayed the night in his head. Could it be that people found him appealing? The thought felt foreign. In the days that followed, Frank began noticing things he had dismissed before. The way the barista at the local coffee shop lingered in conversation a little longer than necessary. The two women jogging past him at the park who smiled and waved every time he and Max crossed their path. Even Jessica texted occasionally, sharing events or just checking in. Was it possible that he had something more than just a kind demeanor and decent posture? One afternoon, while volunteering at the town's book fair, a commitment Charlie had once again roped him into, Frank found himself chatting with Laura, a woman around 42 who managed the local bookstore. She complimented the way he carried himself. "You know," she said, thumbing through a box of donated books, "you have this quiet confidence. It's kind of rare." Frank blinked. "Really? I always thought I was just quiet." She laughed. "Exactly. That's what makes it attractive." It was moments like these that started adding up. Frank didn't suddenly become someone else. But he began to notice the signs that had always been there, buried under his own self-doubt. One morning at the dog park, a younger man named Aaron approached him. Aaron often played fetch with his own German shepherd a few yards away, but today he struck up a conversation. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," Aaron started, "but you kind of remind me of my dad. He passed away a few years back. But the way you carry yourself, it's strong but calm. The kind of guy people respect without you even trying." Frank nodded, not knowing what to say. Aaron went on. "My girlfriend says older guys like you have a kind of charm that younger guys don't. Said if I end up half as composed as you by the time I'm 50, she'll be lucky." That compliment stayed with Frank. Not because he needed validation from a stranger, but because it came unprompted, sincere, and out of the blue. Later that week, while having lunch with Charlie, Frank brought it up. You ever notice people treat you differently as you get older? Frank asked. Charlie shrugged. Sometimes. Why do you ask? I don't know. Feel like I've been getting noticed lately. Not in a flashy way, but I think people see me differently. Charlie grinned over his sandwich. That's because you finally started seeing yourself, buddy. Frank considered those words long after their lunch ended. And over the next few weeks, he made small changes. Not to impress others, but because for once, he felt like he deserved to feel good about himself. He started dressing a little better, taking time to trim his beard neatly, and even got new glasses that complemented his face more. He didn't do it out of vanity, but out of newfound self-respect. And the results continued. Conversations deepened. Interactions sparkled. And that inner calm he always had began to shine outward. One evening, Jessica invited him to a wine tasting event. It was a little fancier than Frank was used to, but he agreed. That night, standing under string lights in the backyard of a local vineyard, she turned to him and said, "You know what makes you really attractive, Frank?" He smiled. "Please tell me so I can write it down and never forget." She laughed. "You're comfortable in your own skin. You listen. You take your time. And you're not trying to be someone you're not." Frank looked around at the softly lit space, the relaxed laughter of people mingling, and then at Jessica. "Took me a while to realize that wasn't such a bad thing." Jessica touched his arm gently. "It's not. In fact, it's exactly what makes you stand out." It hit Frank then. All his life, he'd measured attractiveness by standards that didn't fit him. Youth, flashiness, bravado. But none of those things were required. Not for someone like him. What mattered was presence, warmth, and quiet strength. He had all of those things, and finally he knew it. As the months went on, Frank's world grew brighter. Not because anything radically changed, but because he had. He found companionship, not just romantically but socially and emotionally. He joined a local history club, started writing short stories again, and even took up dancing lessons. And every time he looked in the mirror, he didn't just see an older man. He saw a man full of life, charm, stories, and quiet magnetism. One morning, as Frank walked Max through the park, he passed a bench where a group of college students sat chatting. One of them glanced up and smiled warmly. "Nice dog," she said. Frank smiled back. "He's the best." As he walked on, he heard her say to her friends, "He's like one of those older guys who just gets it, you know?" Frank chuckled to himself. For once, he believed it. And that was the real shift. Not in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. The signs had always been there. The glances, the comments, the lingering conversations. He had simply been too focused on the past to notice.